Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right. This is Jeff Kushmerek here, and I'm here with Randy. Randy, why don't you introduce yourself? The funniest thing here is that you're the first person that I didn't work with for 10 years on the podcast, which is exactly what I wanted, because everybody's been in this insular Boston community thing. And we have a lot of the same shared experiences, and I'm sure people were like, "Endeca again, really?" So I'm just
listening to your podcast, I'm like, he knows everybody back there.
So why don't you tell me, the reason, why, so anyways, we met because we sort of part of a mutual sort of a mastermind thing, which we won't talk about here. Anybody can reach out to me, but met really lots of great, powerful, and hardworking people through that. And we had a mutual friend that was connected on LinkedIn, and he liked one of your podcast episodes. And I checked it out, and I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is an expert in project management. And through the real, I'll prep it and sort of hand it over to you. But the thing that really attracted me to want to chat with you is that you cover the realm of project management, sort of ways of doing things. I know I'm missing terms here, but some people got the PMP license and they're like, I'm PMP, right? And some people are like, everything's a pendulum swift, right? It's a shift, and it's like, no, I'm Scrum, no project plans and everything like that. So without making it sound like a job interview, I'd love for you to take me sort of through those phases, because I think back in the day, we all were. I didn't do PMP, but I was like one notch below that. My classic joke was like, well, I'm not planning the space shuttle launch, so I don't need to be a PMP.
Right.
So I was just being lazy.
You have to put together some. Yeah. I'm reading Seth Godin's book right now, and he suggests that we try to describe ourselves in a horizontal and a vertical axis in a diagram to kind of see, because he's big on finding your niche and trying to go after a particular segment, not the first segment of the bell curve, but go out to the tail and then own a piece of the tail. And so if I had to do that, I think what I would do, my horizontal axis would be probably what you described, which is, first of all, I started out in business analysis. So I was a business analyst.
Classic move.
And I think that's a fantastic place to start if you want to go into the project space. So I started back in the day when Agile didn't exist. So if you were to look at a horizontal axis, going left to right, the left side of that might be you're a single dimensional project manager, meaning you are, like you just said, you're absolutely a Scrum person or an Agile person or a PMP or Waterfall or critical chain or whatever. You have one dimension.
Yep.
You may be a black belt in karate, right? But you just teach karate.
Right.
And then the right side of that horizontal axis might be you're a mixed martial artist. You got karate, you got Muay Thai, you got jiu-jitsu, you got the whole game, right? And that's kind of what I've tried to do. I've got 6 certifications in this. I've tried to do, I've covered the Agile. I've learned something from every single one of them.
Oh yeah.
I understand the Agile stuff. I understand the PMP, the old school stuff. I understand how PMP tried to mold the Agile stuff in, which I like. The critical chain, and basically what is interesting is at the end of that, you get this kind of gestalt. You get this mosaic of where are the similarities, where are the differences, and there's value in all of it. So I like to think that the artistry of what we do is to come to a situation with a very big toolkit and see what that situation needs, and then bring out the right tool for that situation, or that right set of tools for that situation.
Yep.
What I often see is that people are newly minted whatever, and they what's happening is they do their thing on whatever situation they're in.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to roll out Agile. They're going to roll out the 10 knowledge areas. They're going to do this thing that they've learned, and not taking advantage of, that might not be appropriate for this situation. There might be another, or there might be some hybrid kind of a thing. So I definitely see myself on the horizontal axis. I'm on the far right. I'm not a single dimensional. I'm multi-dimensional. Like I can do it this way, that way, the other way, and combine them and mold.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And the funny story I tell on that is we started getting into a little bit, and then I was like, oh wait, I'll just save it for the podcast. Where I went off and then got my Scrum certification, and then convinced our group leader to switch our professional services methodology over to Scrum, and then we got ScrumWorks as this nice tool. And I just remembered, showing it off, and I think it was Ford, where we're like, oh, and then we manage the backlog, and we drag this into here, and if you ever want something, we measure the points out. And they're like, hey, that's cute. I need a project plan. I was like, you got a project plan? Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I also teach, and if there was a vertical axis on my chart, the bottom of the axis might be people who are in the certification prep world.
Okay.
That's where most of that's coming from, is like, or most of the people in this space that are trainers are teaching you how to pass a test. And it's basically, you come to them and they teach you how to pass an exam. And I remember when I was preparing for some of these certs, I was sitting with, and he was throwing out scenarios, and he's like, what would you do? And I was telling what I would do. Another guy would tell what he was doing. And he's like, okay, time out. And he goes, in the real world, that's exactly what you would do. All good answers. But we're here to learn, what does the PIN box say you should do in this scenario? We're not here to talk about what you would really do. We're here to say, what's in that book? You're here to learn what's in that book. And that was a big realization for me, that, okay, it's useful, and it's these frameworks are good, but it's not necessarily that if you get the certification, you're prepared for the real world.
Right.
I think it does help you, because like I said, every time I have 6 of these, so I found value in all of them, but it's not like you could be a newly minted whatever and not have the common sense to be able to just put it into practice.
Yep.
If there was a vertical axis, the bottom of that axis might be people who you come to them to get trained on certification. And I've gone to the top of the axis and said, I come to you and I help you customize your solution. Right. And I train you in this whole breadth of stuff based on what you need.
No, that's 100% perfect. As a matter of fact, it's Ken Schwaber, I believe, the guy who wrote the original Scrum book, came to our company because we were having issues with Scrum, implementing it in the sort of real world. When we were walking him through some of the things, he held up the book, and at the time he said, this is 10 years old, right? It's a good book, but in order to make this correct, you need to mold this to your organization. And you just can't say, well, Scrum says we can't meet today, we've already met, and but if shit's on fire everywhere, you're gonna have a meeting about it. And I might talk even though I'm a chicken, right? So he was really, the guy who wrote the book said that, and I was like, gotcha, it's a template, but you need to
we get religious about a methodology, and people fight over, should I use Scrum, should I use points or ideal days or all these things, and the people who are just, there's so much ego investment in some of these things. But if you talk to the founders, like Alistair Coburn is here in Salt Lake City, and actually I'm pointing out to my right here, but the manifesto was written here.
Was it really? Oh my God.
Snowbird ski resort just right down the road. And there's, Alistair talks about shu-ha-ri in his book, which is Japanese terms. And basically talks about when you are, like, I'll use karate because I did that as a kid. Like when you start out in whatever it is, whether it's karate or with project management, process or whatever, the thing is you just got to learn tell me exactly what a horse stance is and how am I supposed to move my hand, and just tell me what to do. And you're trying to get your awkward body to fit into how they want you to move and
right.
all that. You have no idea why you're doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
Do what they're saying, right? Do what's being told. That's kind of the shu, that if I'm interpreting him right. And then the middle layer is kind of like, okay, I've got some of that muscle memory down.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm starting to understand why do we rotate our fists when we punch? Why do we punch with the first two knuckles and not the last two? You start to understand some of the meaning behind it. And then the last level is when you get to this highest level is now you've got a level of mastery. And I can't remember what book it was, but it's called The Adjacent Possible. There's this idea of this adjacent possible, that when you get to the top of this mountain, you now see the adjacent possible. You now see that mountain to the left and that mountain to the right. And you start to have this Venn diagram start to go on. And you start to see how similar we are in so many different ways. And then you start to see the important differences. And then you start to be able to combine and blend
right.
in a way that was impossible if you were down at the bottom or the middle layer. And you can't even have those thoughts on your way up because you're just so overwhelmed with memorization and
yeah. Am I correct in saying that it seems like through the training and then eventually the application, you start gaining this perspective?
Yes.
And you're able to then merge it together.
You start to arrive at a place where you're like, okay, I know what the books, all of the books say.
Yeah.
Now I know why they say that. And I now even understand the first principles is where were they coming from when they made that decision.
Right.
They could have made this other decision, but they chose over here. Or two people were on different sides of the planet having the same thought and they came up with two different solutions, but they're really trying to solve the same problem. And then you start to see at the end of the day, the CEO, they just want to get the project done.
Absolutely.
They just
now you're talking my language. Exactly.
Get it on scope, on schedule, on budget. Right. I'm happy. I really don't care if I'm a C-level, if you followed it. I don't care your methodology, right? And I have to get that project done because it's a means to an end. I have some business goal that I have to meet.
Absolutely.
So that's what I think the rest, I've kind of gotten to a point in my career now where I'm turning around now, and instead of me directly managing everything, which, I managed a project and then I managed 5 projects, then I managed a portfolio and then a program and blah, blah, blah. And then finally it's now, well, there's a whole lot of millennials coming up. And there are people in the 20s and 30s actually who they want to learn how to manage projects. And so now I'm turning my attention in my career to being a coach.
Yeah.
And then also an advisor and a consultant and a trainer to kind of basically teach.
So so let's take, that's awesome, by the way. You just made a question pop up into my head, which I have a little bit that we touched on in the agenda, but you really made me think, because for some reason I keep getting tagged in Quora. I was like, somebody wants you to answer this question. And it's like, how, I'm sure they tag a bunch of people, and it's sort of like, what's the first step in becoming a project manager? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know. It's like, and now having that conversation, and originally I was like, well, go become a business analyst, but it's not really that. And I'm trying to do that larger thinking that you're sort of talking about right here. Is that what you're doing now? Like you're talking to people and you're trying to define the situation, and then you put in what you think is the best situation? Or are you giving them sort of this foundational layer for them to choose from?
It's a variety of things. There's scenarios I'm brought in where they have somebody who's their designated project manager or scrum master, whatever. Some of them have got a certification, some of them don't. And yet they still don't necessarily know how to apply it. in their particular weird, dynamics, and people don't, like you said earlier, it was really astute that people don't necessarily feel like they can mold this, and like basically what you have are principles, and that's the whole idea of the retrospective is take
Right.
what did work, what didn't work, and the idea is like if you take a retrospective seriously and you say you take the feedback in, you modify your operating system to accommodate it, you try it, you experiment, some things work, some things don't, then what will happen is over time, your particular flavor of Scrum or whatever you're using will become unique to your organization, but it will work.
Right.
So like what I've done here, we had to modify, like, for example, the whole daily stand-up thing. I tried to do it the vanilla way just to see what happened, failed miserably. We modified it. Now it's like awesome, but it's not going to be in a textbook anywhere.
Right.
And I've even thought about, I don't know.
I'm just curious, how did it fail miserably? Like, I haven't seen stand-ups fail too bad, except for when people just don't want to talk. But
there's a culture here of, I think we had to first adopt a culture of accountability and transparency that wasn't in play. There was, the folks here were used to working in their own little bubble.
Yep.
And they were very, very good technicians, and they were very good about being accurate, but there was some challenges with being on time. And so what we've, like, people don't just need what they need it within a utility window that will solve some problem. And if they get their result, but they get it late, it's like, sometimes they don't need it, right? And so I was bringing along this idea of getting like the timeliness factor. And to do that, I believe in making things transparent, making like visual project management, and coming together and then opening the kimono to say, this is what I'm working on. What are you working on? I'm about to have a handoff from me to you, or whatever you wear that, all that kind of stuff that facilitates getting things done. And that was very, very new here. Like everything, it was a whole different culture.
yeah.
So I wasn't as, my spidey senses hadn't been calibrated yet to that. So I was trying to implement a set of practices that assume some cultural mores that didn't exist.
So you're kind of like, you're running a project, you assume people get assigned 5 points, they're going to get that 5 points in before the end of the sprint. But as I've seen, if people aren't used to that, they're like, oh, it'll just slide. I'll just get it done on the next sprint, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen that so much. And it's funny because none of the people I've talked to before would ever say that was like a services versus product thing, but it's more of a personality and more of a culture thing. Our only difference, I think, in professional services versus, everything else is that your customer will just like, just yell and scream at you and not pay you if you don't, if you don't do things on time and on budget and everything like that. Which, by the way, I'll share out to you. I don't know if you saw that Hertz Accenture thing that happened back up. I'll send it to you, and maybe it's funny. I might do a little roundtable on this later, but Accenture is being sued by $30 million by Hertz for, like, as I would say, screwing up a project 6 ways to Sunday. But yeah, I will always say that the client, if it gets that bad, the client's got some ownership in that as well too. But for another time. But yeah, it's a fascinating read. So
I've thought about like doing a podcast of real world application, like interviewing people and saying, okay, you say you're an Agile shop, how does it really work?
Yeah.
In your shop, and have somebody else and how does it really, and find out that it really does work, but it works different. Like it's
yeah,
different,
you should. I was hoping to get into some of that with some of these, but
you would find that variety, but
yeah, it's worked on different things. So let's switch into one of the things I brought up, which was the personality types for PMs. And this might be just based on the different industries that you're in. For example, I'll just to help spur thought along. When I was at a company called Bright Cove, I had to have a variety of different types of project managers. I needed to have the PMP person because we would occasionally get these big ass multi-million-dollar projects in. I had to have everybody loves this person because she's just great to be around, more of a client, manager and things like that. And things like, you're super technical PM, like you do the pre-sales and you're like, okay, Kate's going to be on this project and Adrian's going to be on this one. You know what I mean? And so, but we were just doing digital types of projects, smash and grab jobs, most of the things, 3 to 4 months. But you're on some pretty hairy, healthcare and government things as well. So I'd love to sort of see your perspective on personality types and those types of projects, and see if a Venn diagram kind of comes up in the conversation between those two things.
Yeah, I don't know if it's not a personality trait, but often the project manager that emerges is the most organized person in the room.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're an introvert, extrovert, bubbly, personable, not personable. I've seen people be very successful with the whole spectrum of personality types, but there are some, I don't know if it's personality, but it's more of like a characteristic.
That's probably a better word. Yeah.
There are some things that you have to be able to do to be successful. And I've noticed, like, just being very organized is one, being able to keep a whole lot of stuff straight.
Yeah.
Whole lot of moving.
Not fuzzy. No, like reading back in conversation like a court stenographer. Like, no, actually you said. Let me just go through the
part librarian, right? You're part like keeping track. But one of the things that I think is most overlooked is there's several, and this is part of the stuff I try to document on my podcast. One of them is just being able to have a crucial conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
That was so hard for me. That was like impossible, really, for me when I was a 20-something.
Yeah.
And I was starting out. I couldn't. Like, you have to be able to have the conversation of, you said you were going to get X done last Thursday, and it's now Monday, and we have a bunch of other stuff that has, like, when is it going to get, like, being able to have a conversation around accountability
and without emotion, right?
Yes. And you have to, and Covey taught us, you don't want to just get the golden egg, which is get the result done, but then kill the goose while you're doing it, so that they never want to work for you ever again. You have to do it in such a way that you keep the goose healthy and you get the result. And that requires some tricky.
Yeah, no, I think that right there, that's in my mind, like, I've been going over this a lot for like 15 years, but you just kind of characterized it right there. Because there are some people that will grind their team down and the thing will get built. And then, hey, why did everybody quit? Or how come nobody wants to, how come in staffing they say, well, nobody's going to work for that PM anymore. Yeah. And it's that, I love that analogy of the golden goose. That's a great one.
Get the result for one project, tick everybody off.
Yeah.
Or you can, I've also seen people who would basically just rather do the work themselves than have a crucial conversation with somebody.
Yep.
They would just run around and they would really make themselves sick because they were just doing their job and somebody else's job and somebody else's job.
Yeah, the project manager is going to start like doing like database schema annotations because nobody else is doing it, and they're working 80 hours.
They come up through the technical ranks and they know like it's a technical problem and they want to just jump in. So you have to be able to, there's an emotional intelligence that goes along with being a project manager that I think is a much bigger deal than learning a particular methodology. Like, if you can learn the Scrum methodology and, you can go to Axosoft's video and in 10 minutes, you've got the whole thing.
Yeah.
And like, so well done. But applying it with different personality types and different dynamics and you used to be peers and now you've been promoted and now you have somebody to.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
All that stuff. That stuff is that is the sticky part of it. It's a people business at the end of the day. It's like we get it's easy to sell a book, I think, off of a methodology, but I've talked to senior PMs that I really respect, and I said, look, what if you had somebody that's newly minted with whatever approach you want to say, versus you put a bunch of people in a room with a whiteboard that are very good communicators. Which would you choose? You know, like which approach? And they're all like, you know, at the end of the day, we would choose the good communicators who can collaborate well.
Right.
Look at the company Basecamp. It used to be called 37 Singles. I've been a fan of them since all the way back in the beginning.
Yep.
They have a completely unique 6-week thing. Like it doesn't fit into any bucket.
Right. Yep.
Yet they kill it. Like they're just so.
That's my default, like, need to get something up and running, small organization. Like, let's start with Basecamp. Like, here's some templates.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
When I was with the Redskins, I used it. When I was in graduate school, Hopkins, I used it. Like, we could stand up, we would have a meeting with a big Fortune 500 company about some deal they wanted to do in the stadium. And then, like, literally within 20 minutes after the meeting being over, we'd have a collaboration website up and running and emails out, and this is what we talked about, and they looked like they thought you built all that.
Oh yeah, well, I loved it too. And then I remembered pulling that up in like discovery meetings, or you know, the first one, and like, hey, I'm going to assign a task to you, and by the way, like, everybody will see that you're not doing your task. So it's got this like built-in CYA and everything like that. But
I think from a personality, I think there are times like I'm more introverted. I'm more stoic. I'm more like, I'm not the bubbly, like, I don't know how to, like.
You're not bringing the donuts in every week?
No, I'm not that kind of, like, I've actually managed, most of the projects I would manage were for a big consulting firm, and we would have government contracts that we would be in 3 or 4 different time zones at the same time. We all had to be in the US because our client was the VA, but we would be in 3 or 4 different time zones. We would be collaborating online. You know, we would never physically meet. All of us would never there'd be like maybe half a dozen of us here in the Salt Lake City area. But I don't think that if you can work with people, I don't think that you have to have a certain, you know, you see somebody that's super bubbly or great with people, you're like, oh, that's not me, and I can't be a project manager. Mm-hmm. I think there's hope for everybody. And what is that book? There was a book about introverts and leaders. How many like senior leaders are introverts? So you don't have to fit this prototype.
Right.
But you do have to have certain skills that you have to be able to, and certain things that you have to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. You covered the organized, and that's the key point of it too. It's funny because I remember doing some hiring for a new group, and I didn't have that much budget, and I found like a mom coming back to the workforce who had to juggle like dropping her kids off at school, getting to the office, getting things done and everything, and she was doing it all great. And I was like, you're hired. Like, I could just see it. Like, you're super organized. Yeah. You live in Evernote. Like, I get it. Like, everything's a checkbox. Like, absolutely. It's a great point. But didn't know any methodology or any of that stuff that we're discussing. So let's this is great, and you touched on it with running some of those really big projects. You know, for you as the project manager, not the reporting up stuff, right? Just for you to know how a project's doing and how it's running, operational efficiency basically wise. What are the things that you're looking at a daily basis, or teaching people to look at a daily basis to know things are on track, or I got to hit the oh shit button?
Yeah. There's such a big spectrum, and this is another mistake that I see new project managers making. You can start with, you know, a simple 5-step plan on a whiteboard, and then you can go all the way up to a super complex Gantt chart.
Yeah, and burn down and all. Yeah.
And I literally work with both every day. But you don't. The principle is you don't bring, if you all you need is a hammer, don't bring a tomahawk missile to the party. Absolutely.
I love that one. I always say don't bring a battleship to a lake, right? Yeah. To go canoe in a lake.
Same idea. So like, I always start with the simplest way that we can picture the whole problem. And then generally what happens is as we go into this and we get deeper and deeper, we find out there's not just 5 things, but there's like swim lanes, and then there's dependencies across the swim lanes, and then this has to happen before this, and this is totally an external dependency. So the plan has to reflect the nuance and the detail of the reality. And so sometimes we try to go the other way. It really requires a Tomahawk missile, like a fully blown Gantt chart.
Yep.
You're trying to do it with some simple tool, and it's just not going to cut it because you don't have enough information.
Yeah.
So,
like, for example, anybody listening, like for me, that's when I don't use Basecamp, when I have to start tying dependencies to everything and seeing how it shifts and everything. That's when, let's spend the time and put this all together. And
I'm the exact same way. I start simple, but there's a point where it starts to like, okay, I've got dependency here, and I've got the SAFe certification and stuff, and I've seen how they do this with the strings and all, and I'm like, it's nothing that beats a Gantt chart. In a certain scenario,
when you see it all, exactly.
Story, right? And so I think most situations, my experience, Kanban is the best way to go. And if you have, here's how I describe it. If you and I were friends and we live next to each other and we have another 2 or 3 friends, and all of our couples, let's say 4 couples are going to get together on this Friday, Saturday night, we're going to have dinner, and then we're going to play a board game. Let's say we like to play Monopoly.
Yep.
So we all get together for dinner, and meal is cleared away. We now put the box of Monopoly box in the middle of the table. And now, rather than trying to get the board out and distribute the money and distribute the cards and who gets what pieces, we just leave it all in the box. And we just try to mentally kind of just say, we try to mentally keep track of who was the last person that rolled and what piece, what property were you on when you last rolled, and what would be 6 from that. And then it's impossible. Like, we couldn't play the game like that. And so we have to get the board out, we have to get the pieces out, we have to get the money out, and we have to visit it regularly. We have to say, okay, where are we on the board, and not try to remember anything, just let the board tell us where we're at.
Okay.
And so I'm a huge proponent of making everything visual. And the best way I've seen for most scenarios, not all, but for most scenarios, is you create a Kanban board. I call it a WIP board for work in process board, because that's the terminology that comes out of theory of constraints, which is my other passion. And basically every step in the process gets its own column. Mm-hmm. And then every card that's moving across is like a unit of work that has to travel from the left side of the board to the right side of the board. And so the game is, we got a bunch of pieces over here on the left. They need to all get to the right by this date. And you can put, ownership on there. And then I use labels so we can have color coding, red, yellow, green. And I have found, are there limitations with that? Yeah, and I could go into that. But for most cases, like if a manager just needs to swoop in and you got a 30-minute meeting planned, and then she walks
through it. Yeah.
I've only got 30 seconds. Sorry, I got to be out of here. And you just need to bang. What does she need to know?
Yep.
You filter the board on the reds and you say, we need these escalated. Done.
Absolutely.
End of meeting, walk out, we got the point across. And people can see visually, are the pieces stuck? Are they moving?
Yep.
I do a whole course on that, but
this is great. I could geek out on that for a while, actually. Quick question. Oh, sorry. Quick question on that before I forget it. I haven't used Kanban, and so when you lay those swim lanes out there, are the colors the interdependencies? Because for me, of the types of projects that I work on or we work on here, so dependencies on things. So is that how are you able to track that with that process?
The fact that you asked that question tells me you know exactly what's going on there. So I tend to think that this falls apart a little bit when there's so many dependencies. Although I'll say that with a big caveat. Usually every swim lane, every vertical column is a different job that needs to happen, and that's often a different role. So, for example, when I was managing a company, or I was not a company, when I was managing a project for the VA, the VA has a website called My Healthy Vet, and it's this veteran-facing way to get your electronic medical record, download your charts, order your prescriptions, and all this. Okay, so this is the most deserving group of people on the planet, and this website was like 10 years old. So it was like, that's like 100 years old in web.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
So we had to keep this one up and running.
Yep.
And then we had to rebuild it while this one's up and running. And I was on the rebuild it one, and then at one point I had to switch everybody over.
Oh yeah.
We had like 500 something web pages is in there, and then we had like 30 something portlets that said on those pages, and a portlet's like a little app.
Oh yeah. And by the way, I'm like, if you see me getting sick in front of you, so we just finished off one of these types of projects, and it was so painful.
Okay, so yes. So when you have something that like has to go through, like you have a bunch of stuff, we had 30 something portlets, and they all have to travel through this same process. You have to have an analysis, you have to have a design, build. So you have this little thing. So every one of those columns is a different step, and then you can basically line all 30 of those portlets would be their own little card, and then they travel across. And usually every one of those columns is like a different person. It's usually not the same person that goes sometimes there are. The configuration manager is not the developer, who's not the SQA, who's not the business analyst, right? And so what it does is it, as a manager, everything starts green, which means it's on track. And we know the next step in the process. We know the next column it's going to go to, which is often another person.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see if stuff is just not moving. If I'm meeting daily on this, I can see if stuff is stuck. I can find out why is it stuck. I can see if there's a bottleneck building in my organization. That's where theory of constraints really comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, I can see if you can put yellows and reds. So our green is on track, yellow is a concern, red is, we call it Houston, we have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that means it's already, we have an issue.
Yeah.
So the colors, the way I do it is, sometimes we'll put a color on there that's like a super high priority, or if like a certain stakeholder has submitted this one,
mm-hmm.
and we have a choice of what do we throw overboard. We would not throw the one overboard that's from the super high stakeholder. We would maybe throw something else over.
Yeah.
But in the 4 disciplines of execution that is from Covey, Franklin Covey, they talk about they just generically say our work should be visible,
mm-hmm.
and the whole team should see they talk about creating a winnable game so that people can come to work and know, what am I supposed to do, and are we winning or losing?
Right.
And it's very hard to do that when everybody has their own work on their own hard drive, and nobody else knows what anyone else is working.
Oh.
Nobody knows dependency.
They're just staring right at the problem, right? I know exactly what you're talking about. I apologize to people if they've heard this one before, but I remember when I was at Virgin, I was in exec staff, and they were talking about how we were going to do this, new merging of these 2 systems, and it was going to provide, let's just say, a feature that nobody else had on the market, and it was also super beneficial for people that needed to improve their health. I'm just trying to be generic on this one. And everybody was super jazzed, like, oh my God, this is great. Like the marketing team's going, and they're like very excited to talk about it. And a week and a half later, I'm getting my coffee, and there's 2 developers in front of me, and they're like, hey, what are you working on this week or in this sprint? And he's like, I don't know, I got some bullshit XML processor that I'm doing. And I'm like, hey, you working on the XYZ thing? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, let me just tell you, like, what that's doing. And he didn't even know. And those 2 of them, like, we're going to do this, and we're going to combine that together, and people are going to log into the application, and it's going to tell them, X, Y, and Z. And he was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Because he didn't even know what he was going to be bubbling up to the visual layer. But it just gets what you're talking about, right? If people don't know the why of what they're working on, it's just a gig, and they're not going to dig it, But if they know these whys, and hopefully they chose this company to work for because they're passionate, like, oh, that seems like a good place to work. I like to work on that problem. then just tell them the whys of what they're doing things. And it's such an issue when people become so task focused that they're not seeing that big picture. The other thing I was going to ask, or maybe say, when we do that sort of Kanban type thing we do in Scrum or Agile based tools here, I think the answer for me, that will work if the architect is into the one who designed the pattern and, you know, created how the project's supposed to go. If they're in on the project, or whoever's being the tech lead, if they have that vision of everything and they're not too scattered, they should be able to identify the dependencies and everything like that. They've taken the epics, they've broken them down, they've assigned them out, and they know that if this story and this story are missing, then this whole epic's not going to get done.
Right. So going back to your original question, you said, you know, how does that work when there's a bunch of dependencies?
Yeah.
If the dependencies are just following the columns, they're just following this flow, then that works fine. The Kanban works fine. But if it's not like that, then I will go to a Gantt chart. And because to me, there's just nothing that shows that as well. And I've seen this with younger project managers. They'll go to somebody, they'll say, hey, Sally, I need this one task done, right? When can you have that done? And that's a very different conversation than you lay out the whole 12 things that have to happen. They say, see number 5 right here? And they go, yeah, that's you. All these other things that have to happen, they can't happen until you're done.
Yeah.
And this one way over here, this has to happen by June 1st.
Yeah.
And this one has to happen by May 15th. And then it's like,
keep hitting the expand button.
So it's a very different conversation. And you know what? It's our fault as managers. It's not their fault, because what we tend to do is we flow down work without context. And the very first module I teach when I teach a class is a context diagram. I want everybody to understand what you were saying before. I want everybody to understand, what are we trying to do? What's the ecosystem that we're inside of?
Yep.
And what's our piece of it? And then how does what you're doing connect to the piece, which connects to the bigger ecosystem? And I see too often that people know what they do. They know one step to their left. They know one step to the right.
Yep.
But they don't know A to Z.
Right.
They don't know the whole flow. They really honestly don't know that all these other people are depending on them, or you know, if they do a good job, and then it just means it frees up all this work or whatever. So to me, that's another, whether you use a Gantt or you use a Kanban board or Whitboard, I call it, or whatever, when you lay it all out visually and you tell everybody, this is the whole game, and this is your piece in it, this is your piece in it, this is your piece in it, a lot of the accountability stuff and those conversations just happen. They don't have to happen.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you said that, and I hadn't thought about that. That's something great to teach. I'm so glad you teach that, because I know I haven't taught people that. I always teach them the why, but what you're saying there is like, show them the whole puzzle, and then they realize, because there's that community aspect, right? And like the whole Microsoft and Carter versus Wikipedia study, where people feel like they're adding to the community, they're going to feel more vested into it and things like that. And people don't want to be the weak link in the chain, right? You don't want to be letting your team down. And that essentially, if you're not holding up your bargain, you're letting the team down. But they might not even know they're letting their team down, because they just have this task and they got to get this task going. They don't realize that you're number 5 on the Gantt chart and number 12 is waiting for you, which, by the way, I've kept my own Gantt charts even on Scrum projects, just for me to be able to keep, like, nobody else sees the Gantt chart for myself. But you know.
There's a lot of up and comers. I've taught a lot of millennials who didn't come. Agile is all they know.
Yeah.
They're up and comer. They go into a .com kind of, you know, a technical company. They run Scrum. That's it. That's the only, you know. And what I am scared about a little bit is when you manage every 2 weeks at a time, and you don't have an overarching plan, then the bridge, like the way I describe it is, the bridge has to start on this side of the river, it has to end on that side of the river, and it has to end on that specific point on the other side of the river, because they're building a road right there.
Right.
And it can't be 6 feet this way or 6 feet that way. It has to end at that spot.
Yeah. They don't build bridges in sprints, right?
No. And there's something to learn there, right? So
Right.
like what I think PMI tried to do and I think it was a good move. I just think too often we go into a project and we're just thinking, what do you want me to do for the next 2 weeks? And the bridge starts to be like this crooked line because there's and I think it really makes senior managers very nervous when they think, oh my God, you're telling me that I can the team could spin this way and spin that way. So you're nimble, great. But you need to be heading towards a long range.
And I tell you, and so trying not to talk too much about my business, but what we do is we build these enterprise architecture, these things with really big architecture and these big enterprise applications. And there's two things we bump into. First of all, these science projects that started off in these sprints and maybe they'll get successful suddenly become hugely successful. And since they were built in sprints at a time, there was none of that not over architect, because there was none of that underlying architectural vision of how it should be built. There's no scalability. There's none of that stuff. So we wind up coming in and having to do exactly what you said, where you're holding up the foundation on one end and then you're rebuilding on the other end. Yeah. And what I've just consistently found, whether it's, working at a product company or working at a services company, if you're building enterprise software, right, you're building something that customers are using and using a lot of, there needs to be a plan. You need to spend a few weeks to 2 months, and so much so, I would say our risk-adverse customers, they don't do any work with us unless we do at least 8 weeks of discovery up front and basically do a whole waterfall thing. This is what it's going to be like, because that's the stuff that we're building. And these CIOs and chief architects, if you just walk in and say, hey, we're just going to do sprints, they're going to be like, turn around and walk away. That's not how you build enterprise software. I mean, there is a point in time to get together and break stuff out and do stuff fast, but I prefer to so my methodology is do a little bit of that waterfall stuff up front and then get to a point where you can run fast in these sprints and people aren't trying to define the architecture every day. And basically let them code during the day, not sit in meetings wondering if they should do something in a certain way. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get on the soapbox, but this continually comes up where, and I hadn't made the connection in my brain that I didn't even realize that the millennials only, this is an anti-millennial thing, but the millennials only know Agile. And I just like to do a little pre-Agile, as I say. We're just gonna get our stuff straightened out here, so that when the developers, create their environment, they can just crank, and it's all been kind of figured out, and we're 2 sprints ahead planning and all of that stuff. So
that's why I'm multidimensional on that horizontal axis, because I came from a world. I was doing projects for T. Rowe Price where we would spend 6 months just in requirements analysis, building 3-ring binders that are literally 3 inches thick.
Little rational rows going on at the time.
Yeah. Yes, and then we would turn that over to the technical BAs who would convert those into technical specs, and that's another 2-3 months, and then take to the developers and this whole thing. And so from the time that the customer started talking to us, the BAs, until the time that they got something demo was 2 years.
Yeah, and I remember those days. Yeah.
It was completely it was not usable. It wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't blah, blah, blah. Right. So I think what's happened is we said, oh, well, that didn't work so well.
Yeah.
So we just kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yep. Pendulum swing. So, yep.
So I think there's a part of what I'm learning is it's trying to take the best of this really worked. This solved a problem. Yeah. This tool is still just as useful today as it ever was. And how do we use that in our practice?
This is great. It's funny because looking at the initial agenda, I was going point specific questions, but I think they're better. I think we've answered a lot of what I was looking for in a philosophical type of a thing, right? It's not the tool. You're just saying, show something visually, right? Put in something that works. If it doesn't work, go down to the next level of granularity that you need. This is fantastic. I know I've taken a bunch of your time up too, so I think we should probably have a phase 2 or something, or even maybe like a round table with some of my other friends, because this has been awesome, and I'd love to see some of the applications and maybe horror story or something like that. But I'm going to make sure, and we'll go back and forth a little bit on chat to make sure that I put some links to some of these tools that you're talking about. You went over a lot of great stuff that I want to check out personally. And this will go up in about like a week or two, because I have a Fiverr person who's like cranking out the transcripts and everything like that. So I'd love to have some of those links to link to. So I'll connect with those. Yeah, that'd be great. So I always try and get people, now that we've gone like, and this is more in depth, which I wanted than most of them, to like pull up out of that and say, okay, let's put the PM stuff aside.
Yeah.
Like, what are you looking forward to this weekend?
I am not looking forward to this weekend, actually.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
We had my wife had this vision of knocking down the wall between our dining room and our kitchen. So we have a huge kitchen, but no dining room, which we only use that like twice a year anyway. So we took a bunch of stuff and we took it, everything from that level went down to our basement. And so now the construction is done.
Yeah.
Now it's dusty and you got to clean it and bring it. It's going to be a working weekend. I
hear you. I think men, and this is not a misogynist conversation, but I think a lot of men would be happier if the house website wasn't around anymore for all these inspirational ideas.
Pinterest is not necessarily a good thing.
Oh, exactly. Well, I hope you have fun with that and at least get to relax. And I'm sure the weather is getting great out there. How close are you to the lake and everything?
Yeah, it's Salt Lake City is just spectacular right now. I'm looking out the window and it's such an amazing place to live, because you have we just came out of skiing and snowboarding season, and then go into this outdoor season with hiking and fly fishing.
So great.
Beautiful out here.
Yeah, anytime you can be outside, it's fantastic. So listen, Randy, it's been awesome. It was a pleasure to meet you and to go through some of this stuff, and we'll definitely do this again. And I'm going to press stop here, and then we'll just chat for a quick second.
Okay.